Sweeping policy changes have defined U.S. President Donald Trump's first year back in office. From new legislation, expanded tariffs, and efforts to reshape the economy and healthcare, the administration has moved quickly to advance its agenda. Among Trump's top priorities, immigration has proved to be the most contentious. Public anger has grown after the killing of an unarmed woman by an immigration and customs enforcement officer, focusing renewed attention on the administration's hardline approach. While immigration was Trump's central campaign promise, recent polling shows a majority of Americans now disapprove of how it is being handled. CGTN's Hendrik Sebrandi reports from Minneapolis.
On this bitterly cold Monday, perhaps the coldest day of the season, Minneapolis residents are back out on the streets for a 13th consecutive day of protests. Anger at U.S. immigration and customs enforcement agents has not dissipated. Those agents remain on the job in large numbers here in Minnesota. Although ICE ramped up operations in the Twin Cities in early December, it was January 7th when tensions here really escalated. That morning, 37-year-old U.S. citizen Renee Good was attempting to drive her car out of a blockaded street where immigration officers had been operating when Agent Jonathan Ross shot and killed her at close range. The Trump administration immediately declared that Good had used her vehicle as a weapon and that Ross was acting in self-defense. But many in the neighborhood had a very different take. They said Ross was in no danger whatsoever and that this was nothing less than murder. Protests began then and have not let up since. It's believed there are now 3,000 ICE agents on the ground in Minnesota and that they've made some 2,500 arrests so far. Many residents here call the ICE operations cruel, racist, indiscriminate, and illegal. Of course, Minneapolis is not the only city, led by Democrats, by the way, that's been the subject of immigration sweeps. Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, D.C., and Charlotte, North Carolina came before. Here in Minneapolis, a federal judge has ruled that immigration officers cannot target peaceful protesters. Well, it now appears a lot of Americans have soured on these operations. A Quinnipiac University poll finds 57% of voters disapprove of the way ICE is enforcing immigration laws. 61% disapprove in an Associated Press poll. Popular podcaster Joe Rogan, a Trump supporter in 2024, certainly has his qualms, recently asking on one of his shows, "Are we really going to be the Gestapo?" Asking, "Where's your papers? Is that what we've come to?" The Trump administration apparently isn't thrilled with how all of this is looking visually. According to the news website Axios, President Trump is still in favor of mass deportations, but not some of the scenes that are playing out in the streets. Meantime, 1,500 U.S. active-duty soldiers are reportedly on standby for deployment to Minnesota. Those troops could be deployed if President Trump invokes the Insurrection Act. The president says it doesn't appear he'll need to do that, but the situation remains very fluid and heated despite the cold. A lot could change in the days and weeks ahead. Hendrik Sebrandi, CGTN, Minneapolis.
To discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Miami, Jadan Horyn is a political analyst. Here with me in the studio, Douglas Sloan is principal at National Capital Strategy Group. From New York, we're joined by Margaret Kimberley. She is the executive editor of the Black Agenda report and author of Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents. And here in Washington, D.C., Abel Nuñez is the executive director of CARECEN. That's the Central America Resource Center, which helps Latino immigrants adjust to life in America. Welcome to all of you. Abel Nuñez, let me start with you. There has been a public outcry over Trump's immigration crackdown. We've seen these National Guard deployments, ICE deployments in many cities, Minneapolis being in the news recently, but they've also been in Los Angeles, in Portland, as our reporter told us. They've been in Chicago, D.C., as well as Charlotte in North Carolina. They've also been no king protests that we've seen on the streets. And if we look at some of the numbers, more than 100,000 visas have been revoked since Trump returned to office, and more than 605,000 people have been deported. What is the feeling among minority migrant communities when we see, the forceful tactics that ICE have been using, and the fact that in many instances there are U.S. citizens who've been stopped by ICE?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. The reality is that people feel scared, feel targeted. Just on Friday, I had an example of a staff member whose brother, a U.S. citizen, active member of the Marines, was arrested by ICE in Minneapolis. And so that tells you that they're overreaching, that there are many ways that they can enforce immigration law, but the way they're doing it now is just in a way that's cruel, that's very visceral, because they want to show that force, but that force is coercive, and that force is more than what the U.S. Population wants. And like your previous piece showed, it is coming up in the polls. People do not like the way that this government is overreaching, how they're attacking people. Because for immigrants, it's not just the enforcement, but it's the way they're cutting down humanitarian programs, cutting off visas, eliminating 75 countries in terms of more vetting. The reality is that what he wants to stop is migration from the global south, brown and black people. I keep saying that he's always said that he wants people from Denmark and other places. It is very clear that his agenda is not an agenda that the American people want.
Jadan, Horyn, let's talk a little bit about those polls and what it means for Trump and the Republican Party. The president would appear right now to be out of sync with what the American people think on his immigration policies. Looking at an AP NORC poll, 61% of U.S. adults disapprove of Trump's handling of immigration, and about 50% of U.S. adults say Trump has gone too far in the way in which he is deporting undocumented migrants. Of course, all of this is political. So what does it mean for not just President Trump, for President Trump and the Republican Party?
Yeah, what's really interesting about this is that the American people unequivocally disapproved of the previous administration's immigration policy, and obviously elected President Trump. But I think there's always a bit of dissonance and disconnect between the electorate's disillusionment with a particular situation and then the application of policy. The American people obviously wanted immigration to be addressed, and it is being addressed. And the way it's being addressed, it appears, through a war of attrition, through media and propaganda, both by Democrats and Republicans, that the administration is losing. And they're losing the public perception battle, and its impact is going to be felt in the midterm elections. Now, that being said, when you ask most Americans how immigration should be enforced, that's where the devil's in the details with most of these polls, because most of them do agree with the removal of criminal illegals and the enforcement of those things. And yet you see that when the media represents these individuals being deported and arrested, the presentations in the media and the public opinion is against that. So there is that dissonance, there is that disconnect, and you have to ask the American public, once again, just like with healthcare, because immigration is a persistent problem, just like healthcare is, there's a perpetual problem. There are solutions, but we don't like the solutions, and we also don't like the problem. So it'll oscillate between one party's enforcement and the other party's lack of enforcement, perpetuating the cycle. And I think President Trump thought he had a mandate on this issue, and for whatever reason appeared not prepared for either the media backlash or the political backlash on the part of Democrats and their ability to message on this. And that is just something that Republicans are going to have to face going into this midterm that is going to cost them the House and possibly the Senate, and the retrenchment of most of these, enforcement procedures and mechanisms.
Douglas, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, regarding the immigration piece, I wholeheartedly agree that Americans do want dangerous criminals that are immigrants deported back to their home countries. But the problem is that Trump and ICE are targeting immigrants that are working at Home Depot, that are going to their immigration status hearings, that are working at chefs in restaurants, and hard-working citizens that are following the rules that were set forth by our government. So I think that's where some of the disconnect is, that, we have no problem with dangerous criminals being deported, but we're now seeing law-abiding immigrants that are helpful in our society, that are a part of our society, that are our neighbors, that are our friends, that are being targeted and aggressively arrested and deported. And that's where a lot of the problem lies.
Right, and Douglas, as I said earlier on, most of these things boil down to politics. What are the Democrats doing about this?
Well, right now they're in the middle. They're going back into a lot of their districts or speaking out against it. It's, Trump is sending softballs across the middle of the plate for Democrats to hit out the park. It's very easy to speak out against the violence. It's very easy to speak out against the random targeting of often innocent immigrants and American citizens that are also getting caught up in these sweeping nets now. And, it's just a matter of, okay, we're speaking out against it. We're going to try to stop it. I think that they're talking about just in terms of using legal means in Congress to push back against some of what Trump is doing. And, at some point, I know earlier on, we were pushing back against National Guard deployment in our cities, and I spoke out against that. And I know our friend Jadan Horyn wasn't a fan of the Posse Comitatus Act, which made that illegal in the cities. Right. But, Trump was pushing that anyway, and we were able to push back against that, the National Guard being deployed, but now we're dealing with ICE. So I know that the Democrats are seeking legal remedies within Congress to push back against this, but, all of it's going to come down to how we do in the midterms. Excuse me, how the Democrats do in the midterms.
Right. Before we move on, Jadan, I just want to get your view, and if you could be brief, please, on the fact that in one of his latest actions, President Trump is suspending legal immigration into the United States. What's behind that?
Yeah, President Trump ran on clamping down on immigration, period. Most people interpret it as illegal, but fundamentally, there is the isolationist part of the America First movement that believes that America is only for Americans and that immigration is the source of many problems related to affordability and lack of economic prosperity and opportunity for Americans.
Yeah. Margaret, Kimberley, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. Now, the United States Department of Justice says it will not be investigating the shooting and killing of Renee Good in Minneapolis, nor will they be investigating the murder of Keith Porter, who was shot to death by an off-duty officer in Los Angeles, nor the death in detention of an ICE detainee, Geraldo Lunas Campos. But the FBI will be investigating political leaders in Minnesota, and the FBI Director Kash Patel said this is it's organized to criminally disrupt and cause chaos in our communities. What do you make of all of this, and what kind of precedent is this setting?
Well, this is what Donald Trump has always said. He declared in a special meeting, he and Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, called a meeting of top brass in the military to Washington. And in his remarks, the president said, we have an enemy within. And he declared that the military would be used against civilians in this country. He has already sent the National Guard ostensibly to fight crime in several cities around the country. So this is part of Trump's policy to use the force of his office, to use the military against anyone and anything he does not like. People have the right to protest. We have a First Amendment, or at least we did. So Kash Patel's statement is just nonsensical and it's illegal. I also want to mention they're called Kavanaugh stops because of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court saying that ICE can stop anyone based on their appearance, their accent, their skin color, basically making racial profiling legal. And that's something that many people do not like. They're American citizens of every race, every color, and they are being stopped by ICE officers. The Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, said everyone in the country should be prepared to prove citizenship. So we have people being asked for their ID. We've seen ICE officers, there's many documented cases of people providing proof of their legal residency in the United States and being detained anyway. So people wanted change in immigration law. Most people don't have a problem with undocumented persons being deported, but most people don't want to be targeted themselves.
Yeah.
And that's where we are now.
Margaret, today, of course, is Martin Luther King Day, in which we commemorate the civil rights leader. This is what his daughter, the Reverend Bernice A. King, had to say about what we are seeing on the streets of the country right now. Let's listen.
I would say we have probably lost our soul as a nation. And you know, when I say that, I don't want people to just think about them. I want to think about you, because our inactivity is just as much an indictment on that as those who may come in alignment with, agree with the type of leadership we currently have.
Now, Margaret, you have also said that state-sponsored terrorism is far more common in this country, and it comes under the guise of providing protection. That's part of a much longer quote, of course. Do you believe what we're seeing is state-sponsored terrorism?
Well, it is. It's called policing. Every year in this country, police kill around 1,200 people. That's consistent. Mostly local police. They're generally not indicted, sometimes not investigated at all. Prosecutions are extremely rare. So even as we talk about Renee Good and Keith Porter, we also have to point out that these cases are typical. They're not atypical. They are very, very typical. And as far as Reverend King's statement about the country losing its soul, well, that is this eternal struggle in this country, that unless there are people making the case for justice, then we will have police killing with impunity. You will have a president sending troops into cities. You will have a Supreme Court Chief Justice saying that the police, that ICE can practice racial profiling, and that is legal. That's the struggle in this nation. If we're going to talk about King today, let us just point out that these struggles that existed when he was alive still exist today. And it's the struggle for the ordinary person to do the right thing.
Jadan, what is your response to what you've just heard there? And does it also point to the fact that the country is becoming more and more divided? There's deepening polarization in the United States right now.
I mean, that is an empirical fact, but also an actual fiction. The United States has, from its very founding, been built on the idea of two opposing ideologies. And from our very first election to the famous transfer of power from John Madison to Thomas Jefferson, we had the Alien Sedition Acts, we had the attempted incarceration of political opponents, and it was litigated in the courts. We obviously had a civil war. So, I tend to think it is incredibly reductive and is a great media talking point to talk about political polarization, but it is built into the very nature and structure of our government. Now, that being said, in regards to death by police, of course, the death of any individual in the unequal application of justice is, of course, wrong. But at the same time, police do exist in our country in order to enforce our laws. And the unenforcement of laws is also unjust and causes injustice. So, for those people that are shot, those investigations ought to occur. But if the police are not there, then there are people who will kill and murder other people. And we do need an enforcement and application of law. So in that sense, I hear what is being said. I second the idea of justice, but I want to offer a full indictment and say that it's state-sponsored terrorism, because the absence of it is also state-sponsored anarchy, which causes and loss of life and in all types of injustices of manifest kinds. And immigration, illegal immigration, was one of them, which is why the people responded by electing Donald Trump. Whether we want to agree with it or not, people were disaffected by that.
Yeah, I want to get to Abel Nuñez. Abel Nuñez, I want to talk about the other big issue that's dominated Trump's first year of his second term, and that's the economy. It's played a big role. Now, according to that AP NORC poll, 62% of U.S. adults disapprove of his handling of the economy, and we all know that the economy took something of a hit when he announced those tariffs to almost the entire world, what he called Liberation Day. The United States Supreme Court is currently looking at the legality of those tariffs. But have these tariffs, when you look at it now, and how it affects people, and mainly people in the lower income group, how it becomes a political liability for the president?
Well, we have to be clear that right now, in this country, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And that gap is going to create a lot of issues, not just for the politicians and the rhetoric that it said, but in real terms. The community that I serve is struggling to survive outside of the immigration enforcement. It is about how life is just much harder for them to exist. Jobs are getting scarcer. But of course, if you're wealthy in this country, you're having a great time, right? So when you look at the polls also, or the way we consume, you see consumers at the higher end spending a lot of that money, and you have consumers at the lower end unable to sustain themselves. And so I think that also creates social instability. So when you look at Trump's administration, it's not just the immigration enforcement, but the way he's handled the economy and the tariffs, and the nature of how he just deals in transactions, right? So he tries to bully everyone and basically makes individual deals with people. You can see that from the way he pardons people. You can see that by the way where those tariffs are getting imposed. You can see that in how you had the opposition leader of Venezuela coming, understanding that she had to give her the prize that she had won, being recognized for the Nobel Peace Prize, because that is something that he wanted. And so this is the craziness that we have at this moment. And I just want to say also that, to put it in the context that Democrats don't enforce or that Republicans enforce, it's not true. Enforcement has always existed. People agree that people that commit crime should pay for that crime. And if they're immigrants, they should be expelled from this country. It is in the way you enforce it and the ways laws are created. And this is where both the right and the left has led us down as a nation, because Congress has had the opportunity to create programs that really strengthen our community and protect immigrants, but they have left the status quo that has led us to where we're at. And where we're at is a lot of disorder, a lot of pain, and a lot of lack of injustice. We have to remember that a lot of people are now comparing ICE to the Gestapo, which I think is not the correct thing. I think this is an American brand. We need to compare them to the slave catchers of the day, which were the initials of our police, which they were authorized by the government to ask papers for anyone that they thought was a slave. And this is what they're thinking. They're profiling a specific community, asking them to prove that they are who they are and that they have a legal right to be in this in this country.
Douglas, I want to get back to the economy and the fact that there is great disapproval of the way Trump is handling this economy. This provides an opportunity for Democrats, doesn't it? Although we saw back a few months ago how Democrats had to take the blame for the government shutdown to some extent.
I think it does provide a great opportunity for Democrats. The economy is not doing well right now. Trump said he was going to lower grocery prices. That didn't happen. He said he was going to lower gas prices. That didn't happen. He said he was going to lower energy costs. That didn't happen. He said he was going to revive the auto industry. That didn't happen. And you can see the results of all these failed promises in the polling. Trump is underwater by an aggregate percentage of 16 points, as high as 19 points in some polls. And, it's in every single subject matter, down 11 points in immigration, down 14 points in foreign policy, down 16 points in the economy, down 18 points when it comes to tariffs and trades. And of course, we're not even going to mention the Epstein files. It's down 38 points there. So all of this is great. It looks like a perfect storm for a blue wave that's going to happen in the midterms and everything. And again, the Democrats have to go into the districts. They have to be focused and deliberate regarding their talking points. Trump is giving something new for you to talk about every day. Just today, I found out that he was using not getting the Nobel Peace Prize as rationale to invade Denmark. and Greenland. Excuse me, invade Greenland, which is obviously part of Denmark. Yeah. And that's crazy. So yeah, the Democrats, this is a target-rich environment for Democrats, and there's a lot to speak on, a lot to take advantage of. And yes, Democrats should be taking full advantage of this going into the midterms. And like one of the speakers said earlier, we can win the House and the Senate.
Okay. Margaret, one final point, and this has got to do with how politics has unfolded under Trump in his first year. You know, there seems to be some kind of invisible constituency in the United States when it comes to very important issues. We've been talking about the economy. The other big issue, of course, is healthcare. And we've seen so many people who are now facing very steep increases in the cost of the premiums they will pay to get healthcare. These are very sharp increases. I mean, there's talk of another vote being held very soon to subsidize, to fund these subsidies. But where do you see this heading?
I believe these, unfortunately, nothing is going to be done. The so-called opposition, the Democratic Party, has not stood up the way they should have. They could have continued the shutdown. They had support to continue the shutdown. There are millions of people who now cannot afford their health insurance coverage and are trying to decide if they will go without it or not. The Democrats' plan, such as it is just to assume Trump will remain unpopular and they will win the midterms. I think that's a very dangerous strategy, or guess I should call it a non-strategy, for them to follow. We're seeing the essence of the Democratic Party being exposed, a phony opposition, a marketing brand that does not really oppose the Republican Party, captive of corporate interests, just as the Republicans are. And so we see people are going to suffer. This should be a huge issue. We have everything we've talked about, people being asked for their papers, citizens being snatched by ICE, people who can't afford their health insurance, and the Democratic response, if any, is incredibly weak. They're hoping to win without having to say or do anything. And I believe that's very dangerous for them. Obviously, it's bad for the people of this country because we don't have representation in the duopoly, but they should not assume that they can win by saying and doing nothing. Trump and the Republicans can still win the midterms.
And that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.